Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I'm going to start with a prayer of gratitude, and then we'll dive into today's topic. Thank you to the source of creation for being this healing session. Thank you to the infinite diversity of expressed threads of that eternal oneness of creation. Thank you to everyone's ancestors for their presence, their loving support. Thank you to the divine in everyone for contributing to the fullness and the richness of this webinar today, and everyone who will witness this webinar at any time in the future, henceforth, for adding your consciousness to this collective, that we may uncover and reveal all the details that enrich everybody's lives, that provide a platform for reconstructing or redefining ourselves in terms which are ever and ever better aligned with the divine definition of creation. Thank you to the eternal tradition of wisdom. All right. So I thought what I'd do for today's talk and healing session and healings is start with a little recap of yesterday, and then a lot of questions came in. I have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 questions. So I thought maybe what we'll do is go ahead and look at the information and the healings and everything from the angle of people's questions. And of course, everybody is free to ask questions by clicking on the upper left-hand corner. There's a place to ask questions there. I will treat everyone's questions anonymously, and you can also adjust your audio up there. All right, and everybody gets recordings afterwards. So the topic is meaningful relationships. Oh wait, what's the full topic? Meaningful relationships that nourish the soul. And yesterday I went through a few definitions of meaningful and nourish and so like that. But I think the important thing here is that everybody's truth is unique. And what we have control over is our own truth. And the way we structure our own truth determines the way our whole universe structures around us. So what we're doing in energy healing is essentially finding a path to structure one's own personal truth in such a way that this truth, one's own truth, coordinates, at least in the case of relationships, coordinates with the truth of others in such a way that everybody can experience their own full potential, that everybody feels autonomous in their path of evolution. That's important. And that divine being experiences its own nature through all of us in the most enriching and beautiful and powerful, incredible way. I mean, I suppose from the bigger point of view, that's the biggest point right there, is that if we can structure our own truth in such a way that the being of all creation living through us is in bliss, and that it wants to be more and more and more embodied in each of us. Okay. So that's kind of the recap from yesterday. Where we ended yesterday's session was with a really thoughtful question from this beautiful, amazing, very powerful spiritual woman in Las Vegas. And she was saying, how do we unspeak the unwanted contracts that we have with other people, especially the contracts of which we are unaware? So I'm going to just unpack that a little bit here. First of all, There are two ways of being aware. One is aware of a symptom. I realize something is not right here, but I don't know what it is. The other way of being aware is having that area that's a problem well defined. So what we're really looking at is whether the situation that we're dealing with is in low resolution or whether we've got it figured out in high resolution. So when I say when you have a suitcase full of emotional content that's behind some trouble or some symptom and we need to unpack it, that's what I'm talking about, is taking it out of that low resolution framework and putting it in a high resolution framework. And on that note, I did want to make one point about webinars versus distance energy work sessions, because I think this is important for all of us to understand the dynamic of what's happening in the webinars, since here we are. And that is that in my experience with the energy healing is that we're all have our antenna of ourself, which is highly defined and high resolution. And then we've got the denser levels of the mind and emotions, which are also fairly high resolution. But most of the time, in order to figure out the source or the seed of a symptom, we have to get down into that low resolution area and find the core. If the core was not under low resolution and we couldn't see it well, we would have already solved the problem. So we're looking, how do we shine the light of awareness into the low resolution areas in order to illuminate the seed or the core of problems? In the webinars, when we pick up a thread or a piece of a problem, like yesterday we were looking at war and alcoholism and things that are associated with culture which are not so supportive of everyone. And what I'll do is I'll start unpacking. It'll be a big globby suitcase full of guck, right? And we'll start pulling out pieces like that. And in the webinars, what I do is I'll pull out a piece and deal with it on the spot. Then we'll pull out another piece and we'll deal with that one. So that's why in the webinars, it kind of seems like I'm sort of jumping around a little bit, because I'll have an overall theme of we're unpacking the suitcase of, you know, you name it, something that's making everyone uncomfortable. And then, you know, I'll deal with this piece and then this piece like that. Whereas in the distance energy work sessions, what happens is I'll sit on my own and I'm not in speaking mode, right? Because I'm just with you. And I'll see the whole thing, and I always do see the whole thing in a flash. So the whole thing will come up in a flash. And then what happens is the healing work takes place, but it takes place within what's still kind of a low resolution state. It's still kind of in a low resolution state. So it's kind of like an overview. It's like seeing a big scenery from a distance, right? You see the big scenery and you can just kind of take the whole thing. Oh, if I put my hands out like that, it puts me in low resolution, doesn't it? Isn't that interesting? Okay. Anyway, so there'll be the overall healing of that situation or concern that's up for the group that day. But then I don't send the report for about 2 or 3 days. Well, 1 or 2 days. I usually try to send it within 24 hours. So what happens is I have time to really unpack it and bring it into high resolution and then put it into written words. So the written words are the high resolution version of that healing. Now, this ties into one of the questions which I felt I did not handle as completely as I would have liked to yesterday, which was the question about tantra. Where is it? It's one of these. Well, I did have it a minute ago. Anyway, the question about tantra, oh, here it is. Yes. And so, okay, so I'm not an expert on tantra, and also just throwing this out here to the group, that the person who asked this question said, is there anyone in the group who can recommend a superb book about tantra? So if anybody out there has any resources or information that might be helpful to this person, go ahead and mail it in, I guess email it in to me and I will pass it on, because people do like to stay anonymous. But thank you very much, and I will treat your response anonymously. However, I was thinking a lot about tantra as I was processing yesterday's session, and what I came up with was that a lot of times in the unpacking process, we verbalize. But what Tantra does is it takes that experience or that sensation, that element of creation when it's in its low resolution state, and it finds a way to express it physically or through the senses directly, thus bypassing the verbal mechanism, bypassing logos. So music and art do the same thing, yes? So this is a completely valid way of accessing thick, compact, you could say, compact segments of consciousness, which may seem to be too much of an effort to unpack, or one doesn't want to take the time to unpack them. And absolutely the value of Tantra in this case is that individuals can communicate a huge amount of information very, very quickly because it's not having to unwind through the verbal mechanism. Tantra, it's an art. It's like an art form. And the very little bit of reading that I've done on it has indicated that at this time in history, it's somewhat misunderstood actually, and it's interpreted different ways by different people. And I think that's probably one reason why this person's wondering if there's a book out there, because you know, it's a huge subject. And I would say that ultimately, for me, it's something I need to unpack a little more slowly. Having more time to unpack big problems, unpack packages, allows one to get into higher and higher and higher fidelity, or higher and higher resolution. And that ties into another question. Oh, this is it. So some really awesome questions from Croatia here. Were we as humans at the beginning, oh wait, no wait, that's not the one I was thinking of. Or is that the one? Oh no, sorry. Okay, this one's from Germany. This is the one I wanted to I'll go to Croatia too. We're gonna do everybody. But this lady says, when doing some self-healing, I often notice there are many small issues to take care of. This ties in, doesn't it? And to take care of each issue to take care of each issue separately takes a long time. So she's thinking that there must be a way to heal the whole body all at once, and to do that self-healing when one comes across the seed or the source of an imbalance. You know, there should be a way to get right in at the seed and deal with it directly at the seed level. The answer is, as individuals working on our own healing process, there is. Because when we're working on it ourselves, like if I didn't have to send you written reports for the do sessions, then the healing would happen very efficiently and effectively, even without writing everything down. In a sense, it seems like I'm writing it for you, but really I'm writing it for me. Because I go in and feel the source or the seed of that imbalance. And a lot of times very often it feels like either discordant feelings or discordant feelings with false beliefs connected with it, some belief system that's messed up. I was looking at an old belief system from Mesopotamia this morning. Thank you to someone who sent me a video about that. And man, women had a really rough time back there. So I'm going to use that as the example. Women had an awful, horrible time back in Mesopotamia. They were not treated as equals by even modern, even 100 or 200 years ago sense of the word. It was rough. It was very rough. And the feeling of that, of what it was like to be a woman back in this ancient time, was horrible. There was no voice. The law was that if a woman spoke out of turn, she could have her teeth knocked out. Like that was a law. Sorry. Cleansing that whole area. Probably some cleansing that needs to take place for the verbal mechanism and the throat and neck area. But When I was feeling that mess, what I really felt as awareness was going in and shining the light on what it felt like to be a woman in ancient Mesopotamia. The fact that the light of consciousness itself was shining in to the deepest level of feeling, like not just on the dense, gross level of, this dramatic event that happened there and that little drama over there, but just the state of womanhood in these ancient times. And I just felt there's a certain amount of pain associated with that state. There was a feeling of almost being like indentured servants, And so when the light of awareness shines in, it immediately starts to unravel that discord. The light of consciousness shines in along with fine structures at the subtle levels of the physiology. So that includes, compassion and understanding and hope and wisdom, that being under such tight constraints results in becoming very, very capable and very creative. If you can't speak, then you have to find other ways. You have to find other ways, because otherwise life has to stop, because life is about the expression of divinity in the relative. So we're undoing that feeling of being muted or the voice imprisoned from that time period. This is a healing for the mothers and grandmothers of people in the whole world. Because when you go back that many generations, we've touched upon a level of the math of it. It touches everyone. So what this is a big healing for the ability or capability to speak one's truth, and to use the divinity of speech, logos, to use that as a tool to allow the unpacking process to occur with grace. So for my friend's question, it should be a way to do it all at once? The answer is yes, you can always do it all at once. And doing it all at once will certainly support getting rid of the symptoms. However, the nature of the soul and of the process of divine embodiment is that we want to see what we're doing in high fidelity, or we want to hear it in high fidelity. We want to see it in high resolution. We want to see the detail. And to go to the detail, it is very helpful to unpack the suitcase and to look at each piece one at a time. It doesn't mean that you can't enjoy the effects of the healing even while the suitcase is unpacking. I think at one point, Maharishi once said, dear Maharishi said, to enjoy the fruits of knowledge even while the tree of knowledge is still growing. That's a quote from him. And that basically means the same thing. It means getting used to placing perception at different points along the manifestation spectrum, so that one can get down into the spot where the seed or the source of imbalance resides, and then shining the light of awareness in on that imbalance supports the transformation of the imbalance. And yesterday we did a lot of healing for the actual dynamics of that process, of how you've got your consciousness or your being in a particular state, which is basically a foundational state for all the relative manifest parts of self. And it's okay, but if there's a symptom, it means something's wrong in the foundation. So what happens is the foundation is actually a form of self-definition. This is also a little bit of recap from yesterday, and that in order to redefine oneself at a higher level in a terms that is better aligned with divine intention or divine definition, this has to break down, and one goes into a state where things are uncertain. The experience gets familiar. The experience of transcending can actually be a very sweet, very soothing experience, but for multiple generations and many, many centuries, people have felt pretty freaked out and scared about that feeling of going into I'm just floating and I don't know where my foundation is. They feel like, oh, I don't know where my foundation is when awareness is in that state of silence. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And right now we're clearing some false beliefs connected to and associated with the idea that God is out there somewhere, and that when I'm in that state of deep, deep, profound inner silence, unmanifest consciousness, that because of the belief system, it wasn't possible to make a connection between that experience and one's own divine nature. But that's part of the deconstruction of the old belief system that's going on right now for the collective, because heaven knows there are really a lot of people right now who also still are in that place of belief, in order to redefine oneself much more closely aligned with divine self-definition, divine definition, how divinity defines itself. If we could align our definition exactly perfectly, oh, is it even possible? With divine definition, I think we've got it. So that leads to another question from Germany. And that also ties in, this very, very similar to this other question as well. So I'll read both the questions. One is, you mention quite often divine or soul or self or being or God, and what is the difference between them? I would have thought that all is one. Well, you are right, all is one. But within the context of that one wholeness, we also have what it looks like from the manifestation spectrum, right? So when there's the field of pure infinite, oh, let me actually read the other one because it also ties in, then I'm answering both questions at once. So this one's from Croatia. Thank you, I love you, Croatia. We love you too, Germany, and Poland and everywhere else that's online here. Anyway, her question is, when you see Divine Mother, do you see her with your outer or inner eyes? Do you see or feel her? Is she Mahalakshmi, Durga, Saraswati, Mother Mary? Oh, other names, right? These are other names. Mother Mary, or all in all one. See how you guys were all connected? We're all so connected. You're thinking the same questions, really. And I don't understand that she or he, that she or he polarity, which creates everything. God or Divine Mother, or is just one divine being? Such beautiful questions. So, and I see we've got some questions coming in on the question too, so I'll go to online questions next. But there are different sizes of infinities. I think we've talked about those before. So there's the field of pure, unmanifest, infinite, unbounded being. And that big, silent, unmanifested field is the source of all the manifested level of creation. I usually use a lot of, personally, in these webinars, so people aren't confused, a lot of different terms to describe that field of pure, infinite, unbounded being, including divine being, being, self with a big S, your true essential nature, true self. There are a lot of terms, transcendental self or source of creation. There's another one, source of creation. However, I've been personally reserving the concept of God to include all that silent source of creation plus all this manifest field of creation also. So we could think of the combination, the dynamic union of all of this as God. However, this is about self-definition, right? To some degree, this is what energy healing really is about. If we define that there's this infinite, unbounded source of creation, and there's this whole big manifested field of creation, and they're kind of different from one another, then that definition at some point has to break down in order to redefine in terms of there is only this one thing. And we're doing that right now. And we're doing that in the webinars, and we're doing that in the distance energy work sessions, and we're doing it through the healing that we did yesterday was oriented towards doing that at every nuance of a human experience. We did some brain restructuring in yesterday's session so that every breath, every perception, every neural, every piece of consciousness that flies across a synapse between two nerves, every little experience of every cell in the body becomes a process by which the old definition of self dissolves, and as one emerges out of the field of pure being, the action steps taken to pull out, redefine oneself, aligned, recreate that self-definition aligned with divine definition. Because that is the direction we're going. Definitely. That's what we're doing. But the thing is that even divine definition never stops changing. So even if we're like, okay, I got this. Okay, I got this. I'm doing it. Every cell in my body is doing it. It doesn't change the fact that because we do that, divinity also self-defines. And so the wholeness, the whole universe with every act of each one of us, the whole universe redefines itself. And so that it's like a little bit both ahead. There's this kind of like time lag thing that's happening with the human condition. So there's always a little bit ahead and behind each other. We're always a little bit ahead and behind each other. And so one gets a little bit more ahead, then the other gets a little bit more ahead, and then the other, and then the other, and then the other. And so it's a never-ending process, which brings me to another part of this question. Wait a minute. I just want to make sure I answer this question about God as thoroughly as I possibly could. So basically, the ahead and behind is the divine interacting with itself. It's God. As my dear friend said once, Godding with God. So as we courageously go through you don't have to do this process, you don't have to redefine yourself constantly. You can just sit back and go, I think I'll just not. And what happens is then the evolutionary process slows down quite a bit. And at some point or another, the whole universe has moved ahead so much that you just get like dragged. It becomes, you have to do a big one. You have to do a big one. And sometimes when there's a big one, it's really can be very dynamic and very dramatic, and it can be intense. And it's a little bit easier if every single particle of your creation, of your self, is doing that constantly. Then what that does is it smooths out the process of the destruction of the definition and the construction. Okay. Now, in the Croatian question, I think I answered the German question, because divine self, being God. We covered that. Mahalakshmi, Durga, Saraswati, Mother Mary, etc. I would identify these forms in context of the collective level of self. That's where we start getting animate forms of God, areas where the self is already aligned with divine definition so completely that these forms are in a continuous flow of deconstruction and reconstruction of their own self-definition in alignment with divine definition. Soul, I would like to bring up the word soul since we're working with words, and this, my understanding is that, and it's also to some degree my experience is that some people define soul as the four subtle levels of the physiology combined. So sometimes you'll hear soul referred to as the four levels of the soul. And by my understanding, this means that these four subtle levels of the physiology have an infinite nature. One tends at these levels to identify with the wholeness of creation rather than with, isolated features or aspects of creation. And when I say Durga, Saraswati, Mother Mary, Mother Divine, etc., Mahalakshmi, at this collective level, these forms of creation, they identify with the wholeness of creation. Okay, I hope that helps. Oh, and then there was the question about the polarity between male and female. And here, the Vedic definition is male is that silent field, and female is that whole, also we talked about this more yesterday, the whole manifest field. And also we can look at it in terms that we also referred to yesterday in terms of orderliness and chaos. That the male side of the equation tends to be culture, society, the rules, the scaffolding by which we build our relationships with other people. The female side is nature, the creative aspect, the chaotic aspect, the part that comes up when orderliness becomes too intense, then some chaos has to come in. People who don't want to go through that process, they're kind of like aiming towards some kind of form of orderliness. Can I just stay just the way I am? I don't want to change. That's like going for like just pure orderliness. But what happens is if you do that, you find yourself in a fascist state. So if it gets too much order, you need chaos to balance. If it gets too much chaos, you need order to balance. So that's from a slightly different angle, like a less Vedic angle, more of a like modern psychology angle or something. Orderliness. Okay. Just a little more orderliness here. Thank you very much. Okay, speaking of orderliness, let's look at the questions that have come in. Hello, anonymous viewer. Yes, Tantra. Totally misunderstood, especially in the West. Will personal message you with my limited understanding? Well, thank you very much for that. Yeah, if I can find more ways I can weave in the Tantra element here, I will do so. But we did do a healing yesterday for enhancement of refined perception and the ability to experience more intense bliss with each life experience. And I think that's important for the ability to support. That's just like a support for the ability to be able to be in that deeper state of perception of the finer realms, that more abstract, low resolution realms of creation, and to be able to find a way to integrate that experience at the very physical, very dense level of the self, so that it basically, you own it. You own it. And this is what downloads are too. Downloads will come in and it'll be like a whole book. I don't have a book around me right now. It'll be like a whole book coming in like that. And then, you know, one unpacks it. Oh, we have a message from one of the ladies on the course here. Another perspective is structure and function. Yes, in terms of male and female silence and dynamism. Thank you. Thank you for offering that, beautiful mother of the whole world. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, and then hi, here's another question from our question box. Hi, regarding speaking, some people, even men, hope that people can read their minds and they won't have to communicate verbally. I know, right? So we're getting into this. Good. I'm glad. I appreciate this question. Last night also, a lady brought in a nice kind of practical, down-to-earth, nitty-gritty. This ties back into relationships question. So it would be nice to communicate telepathically, but I don't think that is perfected at this time. Right. It's been called passive-aggressive behavior to not communicate by speaking these days. Maybe this relates to what you're talking about. Even men do this too. Yes. What I was referring to about Mesopotamia was that people weren't allowed to speak. And this is a metaphor, being able to speak your truth. And this does really tie us back to relationships. Being able to speak your truth is a kind of autonomy or freedom that allows an individual to connect to their divinity, because speech is by nature one of the many divine forms, just like the Mother Mary is a divine form. You know, if one is in one's archetype, as like say a woman's in, she kind of places herself in the archetype of Mother Mary, then speaking from that point, she speaks her reality as that. And that speech stabilizes the redefinition of that reality of self. Yes, often children are not allowed to speak. And what that does is it has a somewhat damaging effect on a child's development. And it can happen to boys or girls, but it's very important to be able to speak and to be able to be heard. So if we're in this particular webinar about creating, or let's see, what is it? Yeah, is experiencing meaningful relationships which nourish the soul. The idea is we create the relationship with ourself first in such a way that without having to contrive behaviors appropriate for different people in our world, we're simply spontaneously, naturally, one can spontaneously, naturally act in a way which is true to one's own nature, and at the same time, the truth of one's own nature allows others to live autonomously, to follow their own path of evolution, and to express divinity to the best of their ability. So if the relationship with self is allowing, or your own relationship, we can say one's relationship with God or one's relationship with divine being is structured in such a way that one's own self-communication experience is completely enriching and is allowing you to evolve to maximum capacity and to have your voice and so forth, then naturally that follows in relationships with others. It has to have a lot of flexibility in it, because one of the points from yesterday was everybody's truth is different. So your truth is not going to be the same as the next person's truth, and that's really okay. What we're looking for is a way of self-defining that takes into account that one's own truth is different from everyone else's truth. And self-definition is basically another word for your truth. So what we're doing in energy work is we're providing, energy work provides resources to make the path smooth from dismantling the old reality and rebirthing in the new reality with grace. Thank you for that question. I hope that answered it. Okay, so we've answered that question and that question. We've answered these two questions. I'm trying to be organized so I am able to connect with everybody. I need to go back to the question from Las Vegas. And there's also the second question from Croatia here. Were we as humans at the beginning of creation enlightened? Were we enlightened at one point, and that disappeared through time? That's part of the question. And is the divine being creator of energies that we are not light, which are destructive? And if so, why is it? Okay, so yes, we've been talking about the concept of the destruction and the recreation, and this is a way of looking at the evolutionary process. So that part we've answered. But regarding beginning of time, I think this is important with regards to our spectrum of manifestation. I think this can easily be answered. That the spectrum of manifestation is also a spectrum of time. Interesting. That at the finest level of creation, all time is completely opened up and spread out, like in this, just all time is folded completely on itself. So we have at the subtle levels of our being, we have from the very beginning of time all the way to the very end of time, all contained, like at the celestial level of the body. And then at the collective level of the body, we start seeing forms arise that have some limits to their range of lifespan, if you will. Like the Vedic definition of time is that Mother Divine it's measured in terms of one lifetime of Mother Divine, but within that there are 1,000 lifetimes of Shiva, and within that, I'm not sure which order they go in, but there's thousands of lifetimes of Brahma and thousands of lifetimes of Vishnu and thousands of lifetimes of Shiva contained within each other. I'd have to go back and read it. Maybe there's some Vedic scientists out there that have that. Maybe my sweetheart can make a note. We could just add that little file. We probably can get it on a file and send it to you if you want to see how many lifetimes of what are inside of what. But the point is that at that level, you get more, as you get from the finer level of the collective area of the being to the denser, it becomes more defined in time. And then it becomes more and more and more and more defined until we get up to right here and now, where we're in our physical bodies and we're just in this moment. So it goes from this moment at the top of the manifestation spectrum to all of time experienced in one shot at the finest level of the spectrum. Now we understand why sometimes it's low resolution, yes? Okay, that makes sense. So were we as humans in the beginning of creation enlightenment, and then did it disappear through time? The answer is, in the beginning of creation, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, it was just one being, just one chakra, just one soul. It was the big bang, right? It starts as all folded in on itself, and then it poofs. And when it poofs, it was just one us. It was just me. It was like each of us realized, oh, I exist. I am. And then it started to open, and then it started to diversify. So in the beginnings, we all experienced ourselves being the intelligences that actually structured the denser, more manifest levels of the creation. And now we're at this point where we're actually experiencing ourselves embodied in this dense level of creation that we were responsible for creating when we were functioning as big collective forms. And I talked a little bit last night also about soul families that ties in with that it's like the way the branches come off of a tree, and that at one point, these great beings of creation, we think of as Vishnu or Shiva or Mother Divine or something, we are that at that level of creation. You are the laws of nature at the collective level of the physiology. Okay, I think I answered that question. If I did, ask again. Okay, let's see now. We've got, this is amazing. I think this might be a nice time to bring in this little comment. And this isn't really a question, but this beautiful, very spiritual man sent in this amazing comment. So I want to share it with everyone because it's beautiful. It's just incredible. So as a response to last night's webinar, the collapse of awareness onto itself was that element of the pain, collapse of awareness onto itself. We have in past generations identified this as awful. Oh no, what I knew to be true is collapsing. Oh dear, it doesn't have to be. This is what the healings are for. All these healings that we did in yesterday's session and the healings we're doing today are to allow us to go, oh boy, here it comes, instead of, oh no. So it doesn't have to be pain, but yes, it has been identified as the pain part of the process, followed by the infinite expansion. So we go into the field of pure, silent, unmanifest being. And then as we come out, that silent, unmanifest being starts to expand into the relative. And that can be experienced as pleasure. However, there were also times in the past where even the crawling out part was experienced as, oh, poor me. Oh, darn, that I have to do this. And then eventually you get out and you're like, okay, well, it is better. Okay, I'll admit it's better. but most of the process was defined as painful. So we've had to unpack that suitcase and redefine each of the steps in terms of divinity interacting with itself for the sake of such sweet experience of life, and doing it in every particle of the self at the same time. There are neural connections that get associated with the experience that start to create bursts of dopamine. So every time we go through that experience, there's that feeling of, oh boy, okay, we're going to do this now. And so we're undoing centuries of conditioning in our physiologies. I love you. We need to do this for our future generations too, right? Because this process doesn't end. It is the being of creation interacting with itself. So we're just finding a way to do it that we redefine ourselves in a way and redefine the process as bliss. And what happens is the brain reconstructs itself and we start to really experience bliss every time we go through one of those waves. Okay. So there's the collapse, and then there's the pleasure, with a finite gap between the two, between this old definition and the new definition, a finite gap between the two, giving the sense of it happening simultaneously. Oh, wow. I think I just understood what you wrote. Oh, wow. Right. So this process can go on at a very, like, we could say low definition level, at, like, say, a cellular level in the body all the time. So the conscious mind is seeing it just as a kind of a feel in low definition. That's beautiful. And then he brings in the Vedic saying, Anuraniyan Mahato Mahiyan, which means the self is finer than the finest and bigger than the biggest at the same time. Yes. And that can also be depicted as the lamp at the door representing the collapse of awareness to the gap, the point between absolute and relative, and the lamp representing the light of consciousness or awareness shining everywhere in all directions to infinity, again, simultaneously. Oh, I love that. I love the element of simultaneity in there. That's really powerful, because that what that's doing is he's defining it at the level of the collective self, where everything all time is simultaneous, right? I love that. That's so beautiful. Thank you. There's one more thing I was going to say about it, but I can't remember what it was right now, so I guess I'll go back to that later. Okay, so where are we? We still have some more questions. Oh, another question has come in on the chat box. Okay, anonymous viewer. Thank you, everyone. This is so much fun answering questions. I love it. You are activating in me so much deep gratitude. Thank you. Your deep gratitude, even before I read the rest of the question, the deep gratitude is one of the energy frequency constituents that makes this process of collapse and rebirth, death and rebirth, basically, in a mini way. It makes that process, it smooths it. It's like definitely the gratitude and reverence I think we talked about at the last set of webinars. These structures are also, these emotions are also associated with dopaminergic flushes in the physiology. When you feel like, oh God, thank you so much, it creates a flush of this really yummy neurochemical that starts to connect the process with bliss. So that's what we want to do. We want to get ourselves, basically the collapse of the old and the redefinition is all about a dialogue of divinity back and forth between the finest level of creation and the densest level. And that means restructuring the physiology to accommodate the new definition. And because from there, once the physiology has adapted, then we're really ready for another big one, right? Thank you. Thank you for the gratitude. Could you please talk more about human relationships? Yes. Recently, I feel a deep confusion about it. It feels like I am open to understand in a more subtle level the intimacy of human relating. I'm aware of an inner call to relate to others, while at the same time realize that while I seek all connections to be a free exchange at the deepest level, there's another kind of relating. Can you address some of this? Yeah, thank you for bringing it back to human relationships. There's also a really important question from yesterday as well, but someone who's actually with us, they sent it in yesterday, but they're here today. And this lady has an even more specified question, so I think I might combine my answer a little bit between the two, but hopefully answer everyone's question too in the most complete way. Her question is even a little more specified, and it says that she was wondering how to heal a relationship where there is a memory of past life betrayal and be fully present in this moment without the past life bleed through. And the question relates to her relationship with her mother-in-law. So I first would like to thank everybody for their questions again and say that there are natural boundaries and limitations in our relative material level of creation, which I feel almost they cause certain relationships to be more difficult than others. We all know from tradition that mother-in-law relationships are not easy relationships, and that's traditional across every culture, in every language, and through time. So I'm on both sides of that picture right now because I have a mother-in-law who, by the way, is a lovely person. I couldn't have asked for a better mother-in-law. And I also am a mother-in-law. And I can tell you from experience that it is way harder to be a mother-in-law than it is to have a mother-in-law. Isn't that interesting? It is harder. It's naturally more difficult. And I think the reason is that the mother has had a lifetime to unpack her feelings about her children. And when you have plenty of time to unpack your feelings, you can get them into very high resolution. And the process of expressing those experiences with that child become conditioned physically, so it becomes a very effortless process. And at that point, and that ties into that other question of sometimes people expect other people to read their minds. If you've had a lifetime to unpack your feelings about someone and you've practiced expressing those feelings, you get to a point where you're practically reading that person's mind, and it's really easy. And what happens with a mother-in-law, she comes in as mother. She comes in as mother, but she doesn't get that person from when they're a little tiny infanty baby person. She comes in with the responsibility that goes along with being a mother, of having to anticipate a child's needs and always say the right thing and be ever supportive of that person's growth and evolution in the highest and best possible way without the time frame of unpacking carefully. So what happens is mother-in-laws have to unpack quickly, depending on circumstances, what mothers took that person, the child's whole lifetime to unpack. And that's a pretty hard task. That said, a lot of mother-in-laws don't realize that that is their task. They don't realize that that's what they're supposed to be doing. They just go in thinking, well, here's another child, I'll treat them like my other child, or here is somebody who's a member of my family, so I can just basically treat them any way I like, or the way I'm used to treating other people because they're a member of my family and they're not going anywhere, or something like, I don't know. It's hard to anticipate exactly like I said, everybody's truth is different. However, if a mother-in-law is clueless, if she does not realize that her job is to do a lifetime of unpacking in a week or a month or something like that, or instantly, how about instantly? Because people have their own mothers to compare to, right? It's like, well, my mom can handle this, no problem. So if she doesn't get that and she doesn't apply herself to breaking down her definition of what it was to be a mother, because now she has someone whose truth is different from her own offspring's truth, and unpack and rebuild. And that's a big unpacking and rebuilding, right? If she's not on that and she's like, well, I just want everything to be the same, it could spell trouble. It can spell trouble. And it is the mother-in-law's job to do that. I mean, it helps if the married into the family person is also working from their side. That helps too, but it's not really their responsibility. That's what makes that job hard. Okay. However, I understand also this part of the question to heal these problems from past incarnations. The problem from the past incarnation is about there are habits. When there's a bleed through from a past incarnation or a past relationship into the present, it means that somehow the system has gotten conditioned to accommodate that past difficulty. And so one has to undo that old conditioning. And this, thank you for this question, because it ties into the Las Vegas question too, which is how do we unspeak the unwanted contracts? How do we uncreate? How do we disassemble or destruct the old contracts in order to reconstruct effectively? And the Las Vegas question is especially how do we deconstruct contracts that we're not even aware of, which also I think ties into the German question, which had to do with slowing down the process, right? The reality is that, at least I'm giving you my truth. I'm giving you my truth based on my experience that has created certain conditionings in me. So that is that awareness is the tool. It is the fundamental tool of energy healing, awareness or attention. And if we think of it in its absolute terms, pure awareness or pure attention, then we're looking at pure source of creation fabric material that we have the ability to control. We have the ability to focus our attention wherever we want to focus it. So that is this is huge. It's something we do almost subconsciously, right? Almost unconsciously. It doesn't take any effort to focus attention, but this ability is huge. And so if there's a contract or some information that we're not even consciously aware of, I would say if we're not consciously aware of it, then the unpacking process isn't really possible. If there's a symptom that is a byproduct of that unconscious emotional load, then the symptom can be used as a launching point to follow back to the source, to where is that, how did she describe it, especially those we are not aware of. You can get back to the ones you can get back to the seeds of imbalance that you are not consciously aware of by following the symptom. And when I say following the symptom, that was one of my notes on this webinar, is I wanted to try to break this down into an algorithmic function. How do I take a symptom and follow it back to its source? Because my experience of that process is that it is algorithmic. But I have not unpacked it in the past through to logos. I tend to just do it automatically. Ultimately, you start with the pain or the discord. You can feel, if it's a physical feeling symptom, you can feel physical pain. If it's an emotional symptom, you can feel the emotional pain. And then what you do is you allow awareness to feel that discomfort. And then question in mind, what is the source of this discomfort? We offer the experience with the question to reveal the source into the field of pure being. And then quietly await the answer. The answer, okay, our question came up from this superficial level, right? I'm actually feeling physical pain or some emotional heartbreaky type of thing, some bleed through from the past life. The answer comes in a very abstract form. It comes in low resolution. It comes in as a download, and the whole answer is there. It's a great big holistic, the whole universe is going to change when you get this. You know, this is the whole universe is involved in this answer. So it comes in kind of low resolution, sort of foggy, like kind of looking out into the whole universe. It's like, what is out there? So it'll come in a kind of a low resolution form. However, the low resolution form will have something that you can grasp onto. It'll be usually something that's in low resolution, so you have to know that. knowing it's coming in low resolution, you want to grab that little low resolution thing that you see. And I'm using the word see, but it's something that you perceive or experience, feel. It almost always has a feeling quality in it. Either it has some emotional content or it has something more. My experience is it's usually more like a sensation or a deep old impression, like an old memory pattern or something like that. And then we take that and we just let it sit up in the head area for a little bit. Let it settle into the Anya chakra. And the Anya chakra's nature is to take these impressions and start making something a little more concrete out of them. So what the Anya chakra does is it'll start bringing up little visual impressions, memory patterns, ideas, thoughts, feelings. Sometimes for some people, it may come in as an auditory impression, like a word, or a little voice in your head, or the conscience speaking. So then we take whatever the Anya chakra makes out of that. Like maybe it's a feeling of, I just need to get away. I just need to, I need to just have some me time, just some downtime. So then we take that and we offer that, because at this point, what we're looking at is actually the solution in a low resolution form. So we take the solution and we give it back. We offer it back into the silence of being. And what the silence of being does, being completes it and enhances it. It multiplies it when it goes across that gap. It multiplies to infinity, so it gets bigger. And it becomes more enriched, more complete. Then it comes back in again, and the next looping back in is going to be a more complete picture. So what we're doing at this point is we're offering our question from the surface, and Divine Being is offering its question from the field of silence. And the two questions are coming together to meet in the middle, which ties into yesterday's diagram. Oh, do I still have it? They meet in the middle. There's the diagram from yesterday. You can find out more about that diagram by watching yesterday's recording. Anyway, what happens by having a question and offering it into the silence and having an answer and offering the answer back and then another answer and offering that back is we're starting to condition the brain structure to accommodate this looping process. So with each loop, the brain starts to accommodate and it gets faster. You get faster at doing it. It gets easier and smoother. And if the gratitude is in there with it, the gratitude smooths it out and the reverence smooths it out. And any other value of self, any quality that feels appropriate to add in will make the process happen more efficiently and effectively. I'm describing this verbally, but what I really wish for everybody in the webinar is that everyone gets a chance to experience it, because it's the experience of it that starts to hone the skill set. It makes you skillful with it. I'm in honor of one of my friends who's here. I bring up this point, which is when you're learning any new skill set, you learn it first, the teacher explains you, do it this way and do it that way. But after you do it a bunch of times, it gets a little easier and smoother, and there comes a point where the mind is able to sit quietly in the field of pure silence while doing the activity at the dense level of behavior. And at that point, one self-identifies with the very consciousness, the very life force that's behind that particular function. And this diagram is connected to that particular function, the life force, the very being of that process. So I'm not going to take more time today because I can't believe it, our time's almost over and I haven't answered all the questions. So let's keep looking here. We've got a few more questions. Time for healing for human relationships. That comes from my team. And can we do a healing for sexual abuse? Thank you for the question from the team. Thank you for the anonymous viewer who put up the next question, which is perfect. Can we do a healing for sexual abuse that has happened in past lives and for sexual abuse of our ancestors have experienced that is affecting current relationships. Absolutely. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm just feeling the pain of it. And here the pain comes in. We want to make the question as close to the language of divinity as possible so that the question is very clear. So what I'm feeling is that it's not the actual details of being sexually abused, but it's what it does to one's self-definition. You know, if the adolescent girl is going on and she's fine and she feels beloved and she's the little princess in the house and so forth, and then something happens, all of a sudden this causes her definition of who she was to collapse. And what happens is, as she's going through the recovery process, sometimes it can be so painful that she doesn't feel she has the resources to redefine herself at a level closer to divinity. What happens is she comes out of that feeling like she's redefining herself in terms of a broken thing. So we're going into that. We're not going so much into the moment of the abuse, but we're going into healing the women's and our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers and our ancestors and our own past life experiences, where the ability to pull out of it, it felt like the damage was so great that we couldn't pull out effectively. And we came out with a broken definition instead of a better definition. So I'm just looking at that. So what I'm looking at then is the broken definition. That's what, history is what history is. But consciousness lets us take the old definition, the old, I am a broken thing, and deconstruct that. And so that's what we're taking the I'm a broken thing and we're giving it back to divine being. So the first, as divine being, I'm verbalizing, I'm using logos, thank you logos, to describe as the impulse comes back from divine being. There are a lot of very, very sweet, comforting, beautiful, holy feelings connected to, that we would connect to and associate with Divine Mother or Mother Mary or, a Kuan Yin, some of these beings of great, deepest compassion. So these are the aspects of, coming up this way, these fine aspects of the collective level of self are the ones that are activating. So our awareness is going there and it's like, thank you, gratitude and reverence and love and nourishment for that aspect of our own intelligence, which is activating. These are the parts of intelligence which weren't activating during the original episode or during the original drama of the sexual abuse, that the girl wasn't able to access those aspects of herself. And therefore, when she redefined herself without taking those into consideration. Can even be that without those aspects under consideration, she evolved later then, and then as a mother, held some kind of quiet, subliminal or conscious resentments towards men, which could cause her then to rear sons which were not as well aligned with respecting women as they could be, and so forth. So it ripples out to the male side of the spectrum as well. That first impulse that came back from divine being with all the comfort, then was dropped back in. And for me, in order to bring it up verbally, I had to loop it quite a few times. But for them, they need their voice. They need to be able to, and thank you, this question from Las Vegas is like, it's golden. It's almost like creating the overarching theme for the whole webinar, today's webinar. That they can undo those old definitions by choosing to identify themselves with these broader spectrum aspects of consciousness. And because they're in low resolution, they're hard to describe. So she's saying, how do I unspeak the unwanted contracts? How do I unspeak them? Because at some point they were spoken. Oh, I will always, oh, I will never forgive men for what they did to me. Or, oh, I will always, that's for the person who is saying they feel like they're ready to like have some kind of intimate relationship, but something seems to be blocking. A lot of times it's those old contracts, that relationships just don't work for me. There are a lot of little things that are being self-spoken. And I pointed, the point yesterday was that the thyroid is the organ where the inner communication, it's one of the key organs for inner communication. So healing for the thyroid, those habits, this is part of the healing, the habits, the loops of unuseful self-communication are being dissolved. And awareness has to go in and be able to recognize, oh, that loop is there. Oh, I see. I've been holding this idea of, oh, men are really, not very nice people, are they? Because I was abused and I'm still carrying the pain. It's bleeding through for me of being abused. And so it makes them not nice people. And so I don't really want to connect. I don't want to have a relationship or connect with them. So if we want to open up the field of relationship, we have to dissolve off that old speak and know that everybody's truth is different. And what was not nice was that when I had that bad experience, I redefined myself in even more limiting terms. And there is a vicious cycle. There is a vicious cycle. And that vicious cycle, thank you, everyone, ties into, oh gosh, we're coming towards our, okay, I'm saying it quick. It ties into the alcohol syndrome, the alcohol loop, some of the old loops that the alcohol it causes a breaking down, but then the self-definition when it comes back out is even less aligned with divine intention or divine definition. That is a seed. That is a seed, everybody, right there. That is a seed. How do we ensure that when the process breaks down and it recreates, that it breaks down and recreates at a better definition than before? How do we do that? And the answer is already in both of these webinars. We're working through time, so we're actually coming at it backwards now. But the answer is that we infuse the entire process with the light of awareness so that we see the evolutionary value at each point in that process. And so each point is infused with bliss. When it's infused with bliss, it becomes a suitable home for divinity. So divinity can be at this point in the process, and at this point, 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 like that. And when divinity has worked its way in detail through that whole process, and then we condition ourselves to be comfortable doing the process again, at the dense level, at the organ level, at the tissue level, at the cellular level, at the molecular level, so it affects the ancestors. This is what we're doing, and this webinar is actually about this. Maybe I should have had a different name. I make the names months ahead, you guys. Anyway. Okay, there's still one more question, and we have 1 more minute. Oh gosh, I hope I got everybody's questions. Do the boys' men need to be included as part of the sexual abuse? It doesn't only affect, yes, thank you. Thank you for that. That's right. Boys and men also, have experienced that. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely they are. And absolutely we have, I can tell you it's an issue in my line of work. Of course, it's an issue that comes up pretty regularly. So it gets approached from many different angles because each person who brings it to me, they're seeing it from their truth. And we work together to heal it from the combination of divine being is seen through Dorothy and seen through that other person. But also the perpetrators have to heal, right? Because if a perpetrator does something cruel, they do it because something was broken inside of them as well. And I feel as if working with this collapse, this death and rebirth structure in a way that is going to ensure, we need to somehow, we've come to the end of our webinar, but we will need to unpack this at some point in a much more detailed way. I feel as if it's the future of where energy healing is going right now. I'm just double checking that I answered all the questions up here. I think I answered the mother-in-law question pretty well on that one. Yes, we got everything. Okay, beautiful. Wow, that was really cool and interesting. Okay, so we were able to do some good healings today for sexual abuse, and I guess I'll have to go back and look the whole thing through. But anyway, we were able to get some good healings out and answer everybody's questions. My deepest gratitude to everybody who came in on this webinar today and who will come in on this webinar in the future for being part of this process of transformation. And what we really did here, I think, is we gave voice to and stabilized and supported physiological conditioning to allow the evolutionary process to occur with maximum grace and efficiency. And that itself becomes the foundation of one's truth. And as you can see, it's a dynamic process that can accommodate the fact that there is a never-ending dynamic flow of evolution taking place, both from the level of divinity and from the level of individuality. The whole system is talking to itself. It's talking to itself. Okay.